Dr. Buckland, we're very happy that you're with us now. And in studying contemporary American film, you establish some relationship between different film theories and specific methods for analysis. This is a general statement that can be applied to any theory. Do you think that this is applicable also to the first theoreticians such as Arnhem, Ballas, and then later to Bazin and others? What is your general overview?
I tend to see theory as being autonomous from analysis. There's not a necessary relationship between theory and analysis. I think film theory is focused primarily on the cinema, the phenomenon of the cinema. And what I did in studying contemporary American film is that I felt the need to try to extract methods of analysis from these theories, but the theories themselves don't provide their own methods of analysis, because in some ways that isn't the purpose of film theory. You think of Jean-Louis Baudry, for example, and his theory of the cinematic apparatus. It's about the cinema in general. It's not really geared to the analysis of individual films. Or if you think of other theories, particularly Christian Metz, he's talking about the phenomenon of film, of cinema. And what I'd like to do is try to extract methods from their theories, even though they may not provide their own methods. So I think this applies to all theories. The purpose then of theory is not simply to give you a method for analyzing individual films. That's an additional purpose we can attribute to theory, and I find it a very productive attribute of theory. Although I was, when I wrote the book with Thomas Alsasser, we were actually criticized for extracting all these methods from theories, because some people thought it was reductionist, that it was the theory was just being used for this rather straightforward, mundane activity of analyzing individual films. So I think that's where the real tension lies, is using theory to analyze individual films. So I think film analysis continually has to justify its use of theory.
The statements you have made yesterday and this morning here, you say that they belong in a general tradition in the UK. Is there something like a cultural war between what some call analytical tradition and continental theory?
I think this really became evident in the 1980s, when especially American scholars and some British film scholars decided not to develop the continental theories of film using semiotics, psychoanalysis, and so on. So that tension really became apparent, as I said, in the 1980s, when analytically trained philosophers entered film theory and began to analyze the propositions of the continental film theory and began to deconstruct them. Now, I say continental theory, but this also includes many American academics who are influenced by continental theory, and British academics as well, centered around the journal Screen. People like Stephen Heath, Colin McCabe, Laura Mulvey. They're strongly influenced by the continental tradition. But when scholars like David Wardwell and Noel Cowell developed their theories, they completely rejected the activities, the theories behind continental theory. The key moment, I think, was in a book review that Noel Cowell wrote in 1982. It was a 100-page book review he wrote of Stephen Heath's Questions of Cinema. Questions of Cinema was meant to be the high point of this continental theory, Stephen Heath collecting all of his best papers together to show what continental theory can do. And instead, what happened is that an analytically trained philosopher, Noel Cowell, wrote a 100-page review of that book and literally took it apart line by line and showed that the propositions, in his words, are meaningless, are pure analogies, is purely metaphorical, that there's no content to this tradition. And so from the 1980s onwards, the analytic school began to develop, especially around Noel Carroll and David Bordwell. And it really culminated in their 1995 book called Post Theory, which they mean is a post-continental theory. And instead they tried to establish a more analytically and cognitive theory of film.
And yet, in the cognitive tradition, this morning you have made an interesting criticism to some of Bordwell's statements about classical and post-classical film. Would you try to summarize your statement?
Well, David Bordwell works from a more inductive perspective. His main criticism of continental theory is that it is deductive, that it has a series of very abstract theoretical propositions, which it then applies to all of cinema, and so there's a certain inflexibility to this theory. So David Bordwell's main criticism of continental theory is that it simply imposes a pre-existing framework on cinema. So what I identified in David Bordwell's paper called Film Futures is that suddenly he's doing the same thing. He has this idea that all cinema is classical, and so even when he looks at a radically post-classical film such as Memento, he tries to fit it into his pre-existing deductive framework and say, well, this film is still classical if we look at it in this way. But by doing that, Bordwell is actually ignoring the key elements of a film like Memento. The fact that the narration is narrating the film backwards, for example. He says the film structure is classical. That may be so, but the fact that the narration distorts that classicism through the way it presents the story. So I think Bordwell is actually guilty of the same problem that he finds in the continental theorists, that it's too deductive, it's too top-down. So that was my main criticism of Bordwell's paper.
In Teacher Cell Film Studies from 1998, which is already this year in the third edition, you establish 5 components for film textual analysis: image, sound, montage, mise-en-scene, and narration, and also genre, ideology, and intertextuality. Do you think these elements are always necessary in any kind of film analysis?
I wouldn't want to suggest that any film analyst would need to use these concepts. I would be far more pragmatic and say that the film analyst should think of themselves as what the French call a bricoleur. You simply take the theory that you need in order to explain and analyze the sequence or shot that is under discussion. The thing that I really hate when I look at a title of a paper is something like an ideological analysis of, or a psychoanalytic analysis of. What is more important is you privilege the film and use any concepts, whatever, that you feel useful for actually saying something more about that film sequence. So you don't have to spend several years training to be a psychoanalyst in order to do a psychoanalytic reading of a film. You just need to understand the basic concepts and then apply those concepts to a film at the appropriate moment. What is important is not being an ideologue where you position yourself in a certain camp. I think you should always privilege the film rather than the theory, and then draw upon theoretical concepts that you find useful. The list that you mentioned, if they're useful for the particular film that you're analyzing, then by all means go ahead and use them. But don't limit yourself by saying, well, I have to use mise-en-scène criticism for this particular sequence. In other words, I think it's the film itself that will tell you what concepts are necessary to analyze it. And I think as an analyst, you need to be sensitive to the film and apply theory in a sensitive manner that doesn't just make bland statements about the sequence under analysis, but actually enables you to understand that sequence in more detail. So theory for me is a means to an end. It's there to help me say something more about the film and understand the film. In my analysis of Inland Empire, for example, I draw upon cognitive theory and psychoanalytic theory, and they exist side by side in my analysis, because I use psychoanalytic theory in a certain sequence because it was relevant, and then I use David Baldwell's theory on other sequences because the theory is relevant. So the skill in film analysis really lies in knowing when to apply the right concept at the right time.
And the title of the cognitive semiotics of film is a little puzzling. It's interesting. It seems to promise the possibility to make a general synthesis of these traditional theories. Could you explain a little bit the relationship between the title and the book itself?
Yes, I think cognitive and semiotic usually are seen as being contradictory. They're two paradigms that traditionally work against one another. For me, what is important though is that film semiotics as a paradigm never really came to an end. It was sort of abandoned due to the politics of the academy, where new scholars wanted to move on to more radical theories and didn't want to identify themselves with semiotics. So what I'm doing in the cognitive semiotics of film is trying to extend the work of film semiotics. Film semiotics has its own agenda, and I think you can extend that agenda by combining it with cognitive theory. So I think cognitive semiotics, although it sounds contradictory, is in fact a natural development of semiotic theory. To develop these ideas of codes and then posit that the codes exist in the mind is actually a progression in the theoretical development. Traditional semiotics will say, well, the codes exist in the text. But cognitive film semiotics say, well, okay, the codes can now be located in the mind of the spectator or the mind of the filmmaker. So I see it as a natural progression. I don't see a contradiction in combining semiotics with cognitivism.
Now in your recent book on the films of Steven Spielberg, you seem to adopt the point of view of the general spectator. Is this related to the point of view of the director too? How is this relationship in this book?
In my book on Spielberg, I feel that the need for the film analyst to actually start to think like a film director. That if you're going to understand how a film is made, you really need to embody the technical knowledge of the director. And in the end, the ideal analyst we can think of as being as a film director, because the film director knows about when to move the camera, when to cut the shot, how to edit a sequence together to create a certain flow of images. And I think a film analyst can actually benefit from that type of thinking. So once they know how directors think, we can start to apply that knowledge to films. And I applied it to Steven Spielberg's filmmaking. I looked at his decision-making process when it comes to directing his most popular blockbusters. And I partly explain why they are successful from, his decision-making process when he came to direct them.
And we would like to know what's your opinion about the relevance of film scholarship today in the humanities?
Yes, let's end on an easy one. I think, we live in a media-saturated society, and I think we just do students a great service by making them media literate. Otherwise, we will all end up as consumers of a visual culture, and I think film studies can make us more critical, make us perhaps critical consumers, or it enables us at least to distance ourselves from our media-saturated society.
Thank you very much for being with
Okay.
us.